Good morning once again. So today we'll talk about the cows of Bashan, and we'll be talking about Amos or Amos. So if I say Amos, that's Amos also. If I say Amos, I mean Amos. It's found, my text is Amos chapter 4 verses 1 to 3, the cows of Bashan. Amos is one of the shepherds of Tekoa. I think one of the speakers yesterday mentioned it. Tekoa is a town in the tribe of Judah. You can see from the map on the range hills near Hebron. But while Amos hails from the southern kingdom, he prophesied in Israel in the north during the time or during the period of Jeroboam II. If you read, it's circa 787 to 747. But during this time, Israel enjoyed economic prosperity due to several reasons. First, the traditional rivalry between Israel and Damascus was suspended. Damascus was captured by Assyria in 802 BCE, eliminating Israel's chief economic and military rival, and giving her freedom to trade in previously restricted areas. So the trade was free. Second, internal weakness prevented Egypt from interfering. This means that probably Egypt interfered many times, often. But that time it had its own problems. So trade and commerce flourished. This prosperity, however, resulted in moral and religious depravity, leading to the social injustices condemned by Amos. While Israel's sin may be multifaceted, like there's so much bribery, sale of persons to slavery, cheating, and the like, Israel's oppression of the poor is considered and condemned by Amos as Israel's prominent error or transgression. Prophesying in this kind of environment, however, is not easy, especially that he was prophesying in the north and he comes from the south. Because of this, we see the prophet's brilliant rhetorical strategy by starting his oracles against Israel's neighbors. So let's talk about what the other neighbors are doing to you. So he talks about Damascus, Gaza, Tyre, and so on. After doing this, finally, he points the arrow toward Israel, in particular to Bashan, to the cows of Bashan. What is the significance of Bashan? Condemn the cows of Bashan. First, economic prosperity over justice. Amos condemns Israel in many instances for several reasons. Yet for this particular text, Israel is condemned for preferring wealth over justice. Economic exploitation is most obvious in Amos. You can find that not only in this chapter, but also in the other chapters. One of the earliest articles I read concerning the book of Amos is that of Alger. He claims that Amos's prophecy of impending doom and judgment was mainly because of the control of the land by the wealthy, which greatly impoverished the poor. So it's land control. Moreover, the wealth of the rich was mostly obtained through injustice, be it money or land. It's always obtained because of injustice, through injustice. Hence, Amos condemns and accuses Israel for not living their lives as chosen people. The second one is ignoring the covenant obligations due to greed and lust of power. So these are connected. It is true that one of the foundations, an antisocial and humiliating act that no citizen should do to his or her own kinsfolk. So the act of crushing can only be experienced from foreign rulers. And this you can find in Judges, Deuteronomy, Jeremiah, and in Amos. So maybe it is expected that fellow Israelites can oppress Israelites, but crushing them is different, because the word crushing should refer to somebody from the outside, crushing the Israelites. Sadly, the poor are experiencing both from the hands of their fellow Israelites. So this is sad. And the possible punishment or judgment are actually very scary if you read Amos's text. The image of the people led away by hooks or fish hooks in verses 2 to 3 is interpreted in several ways. Who among you have experiences in fishing? So you know about the fish hooks. Just imagine that being hooked to you, and you can feel the pain already. Unlike the cattle who are led out, so the first is that the plunderer will be removed from their accustomed habitat. Unlike the cattle who are led out to the security and providence of their pastures, the men and women of Bashan will be led into exile to an unknown future. So the reversal of fortune is portrayed by the hooks or fish hooks, as if the ruling class were reduced by Yahweh to mere fish taken out of water, which is their natural habitat. The imagery is then tantamount to the cows of Bashan, who once grazed on fertile land and trampled on the poor, but are now removed from their comfortable and accustomed environment. The second possible punishment is that the plunderer will be led away as prisoners and captives. The image of people being led away by hooks or fish hooks could refer to prisoners being led to captivity. It would seem that the so-called cows of Bashan will be dragged out of the city alive. For these people to suffer this is for Amos a poetic justice. There are evidences that in Egypt and in Assyria, leashes and rings are used to lead cattle, and prisoners of war were tied in the same way. Assyrians would drive hooks into the faces of the captives and would drag them away from their homeland to slavery with ropes. One cannot imagine that kind of suffering. And if we move on to the history of Israel, they were actually captured by Assyria later on. The third one is the expulsion from the land to an unknown destination. Many are saying that if Harmon, which is mentioned in the text we are looking at, will be read as Hadmon, it means dung heap, the place where bodies of criminals were left unburied, and which leaves little hope for Israel when judgment comes. So what is important is that once God casts them out from their place of comfort, their final destination is unknown. This punishment, however, does not only affect them, but because it's unknown already, even the generations after them will be lost too. So Amos 4, verses 1 to 3, exposes the greed of the powerful who live off the nation's misery and how they will be judged. For Amos, God is always on the side of the victims of aggression and social violence. But despite all this impending judgment of God, however, at a later chapter in Amos 9, there is hope for the future. You see, from chapters 1 to 4 and the next chapters, it looks bleak, it looks doomed. No? Everything is doomed. But there is hope starting from chapter 9. It speaks of the Lord restoring the fortunes of his people. And Amos was convinced that Yahweh will continue his covenant by restoring the Davidic house. So even after all this suffering, there is still a vision of hope. Now we move to the practical implications of this verse again. And yesterday, I gave an example of a problem involving mostly foreign multinational companies to relate with the Roman Empire in Mary's time. This is more external. This morning, I want to give an example of a problem which is more internal. And I believe that this is closely related to that of Amos's cows of Bashan story, where the poor are being oppressed. I have to apologize because I'll be speaking about my context. I want to share it with you. As of 2019, the Philippines has a population of more than 108 million, with a land area of around 300,000 square kilometers. So out of the 108 million, 60 million are poor, living at around 2 pounds a day. But there's more, 21.9 million are the poorest of the poor, living at only 1 pound or less than a pound a day. That's per person. You see this picture of a boy who at a young age had to fish at the wee hours of the morning, braving the rains at times just to have food on the table. And many of these children are like that. From extreme poverty, you can see from the chart that out of the 108 million Filipinos, only a few enjoy prosperity. Can you go to the last one? The other slide, this one. Can you see the number of rich Filipinos over 1 billion and above? It's only 12. And then the rest goes on. So only a few. And this gap is increasing with the richest 1% owning 47% of assets, global assets, and the poorest 64, only 1.9. They even became 28% richer in 2017. These are all data from the Philippines. To add to this, if we look at the government debt, each citizen has a debt of more than 77,000 pesos or 1,250 pounds. Where are they going to get that? In terms of the land, the Philippines is not at all small. We are bigger than the combination of North and South Korea. We are bigger than Singapore. We are larger than Italy and larger than your country, which is, if the records are right, 230 square kilometers? Britain? I don't know. Is that right?
It's decreasing.
Decreasing. So the problem lies on the distribution of the lands. It's not really on the width, the large land. As you can see, the map is full of haciendas. Here's the map of the Philippines. You can see that the map is full of haciendas, plantations, corporations, and these are all owned by the few rich people that we saw in the earlier slides. One good example is the Hacienda Luisita. If you can see, if you have heard this, Hacienda Luisita is 6,453 hectares, and the whole of Metro Manila, the city of Manila, is only 3,955, so it's twice big. This is owned by the Cojuangcos, the family of the former President Aquino. Have you heard of the word Aquino? Yeah. The name Aquino? Yes. Many farmers have died fighting for the rights to be given the land by the government. And generations of their families have been slaves of the hacienda. Several protests happened, and in fact, 2 ministers of the IFI, our sister church, 1 bishop and 1 priest, were killed by hired killers to stop them from supporting the farmers from asking for the land. Finally, in 2011, the Supreme Court ordered part of the hacienda to be distributed to the poor farmers. At that time, however, the reigning president of the Philippines was Benigno Aquino, one of the owners of the hacienda. So I leave that up to you to imagine what happened next. What is certain is that the order was in 2011, yet in March 2019, 3 years after Aquino's presidency, they have not yet completed the distribution. And the land that is supposed to be distributed keeps getting smaller and smaller. The gap between the rich and the poor is widening. What is the government doing about it? If you ask them, of course they would say they are doing everything. My answer is in the next slide, in this slide. The budget for 2019 shows how our government cares for its poor. The government's motto of build, build, build is reflected in the big difference between war and infrastructure budget and the social services and agriculture for the poor. Again, even the government is on the side of the rich than the poor. So you can see the Department of National Defense, Philippine National Police, Transportation, Public Works and Highways, and so on and so on. And then there's the Department of Health at that side, Social Work and Development, Department of Agriculture, and Agrarian Reform is on that side. Very small budget and still going down. This is why yesterday I mentioned that the challenge is not to strengthen our prophetic voices, but to recover it. We have lost it, even in our churches. We have lost it. It is clear that Amos's message to his 8th century audience remains relevant to us. Not only to us, perhaps to you too. Those who oppress the poor and disregard mechanisms by which society protects the poor find themselves in contrast with God and with what God values. And yes, we have faith that the judgment accompanies any form of social injustice against the poor. That's what we are good at. We would always say, we will pray for you. We will pray for you. But sometimes it ends with a prayer. We are expected to do something. As they say, our spirituality cannot be disconnected from the social conditions in our own contexts, whether poverty, racism, illiteracy, extrajudicial killings, and the like. It should be incarnated. In fact, in most cases, the poor looks up to the church. That is the case in the Philippines. They always look up to the church. It will not be easy, but the church should be faithful to its mission. Again, we are talking about rethinking our mission. And this is a challenge not just to the clergy, to the church leaders, but to all of us. So let me leave you again with a few questions. Who are the cows of Bashan in your communities? Maybe you don't name them, just identify them. How does your government or church treat the poor and marginalized? And how can you become the modern Amos in your own given context? Thank you.